Hi everyone. In today's video, we will be looking at the XAT paper of the last 3 years. We will be looking at the overall number of questions, difficulty level, as well as for each of the individual sections, we'll see from which topics we've seen more questions. And then we'll be looking at the score versus percentile data to see what kind of scores would be required to clear the cutoffs and get the pots. And throughout, whenever we are talking about each section, we'll be discussing the strategy required during preparation as well as in the exam. Let's get started. So first of all, if we look at the overall test structure, we can see that it has remained pretty consistent over the last 3 years. In the VALR section, for example, we can see that we've had 26 questions consistently in each of the last 3 years. Similarly, in QADI, we've had 28 questions. That has not changed. The only minor change has been in decision making, where from 22 questions, it has dropped down to 21 questions. Now, if you look at the GK section, we can see that it used to be 25 questions, but last year it was decreased to 20 questions. And if you look at the total time that we have in the test, it used to be 175 minutes for part 1 and 30 minutes for part 2, because in part 2 there was also an essay. But now last year the essay component was removed, and therefore now the time structure is 170 plus 10. So 170 minutes for part 1 and 10 minutes for part 2, which is the GK section. So if we look at the overall test structure, clearly we can see that the highest number of questions is from QADI. So QADI, of course, you should target to make strong, because you can potentially attempt a good number of questions from this section. After that, VALR has the most number of questions. So these are the two sections that you should be prioritizing to make strong. And of course, decision making also we'll talk about a little bit, but that is a somewhat challenging section, difficult to get a good accuracy there. So to maximize your overall score, you should be targeting especially the QADI section. Now, if you look at the overall difficulty level of the last 3 years, you can see VALR has consistently been on the difficult side. Every year in the last 3 years, it has been a challenging paper. While the passages might not be very long in the XAT, they can be a bit heavy to read. They can be technically a bit complicated. Even the questions and the options can be a bit difficult. And if you look at decision making, we set similar difficulty level in the last 3 years. Now, by similar, we mean that it has been similarly challenging, because decision making is a section that has always been a bit of a challenge due to the subjective nature of the section. So we'll talk about it when we come to this section specifically. But as of now, we can only say that in each of the last 3 years, it has been a pretty challenging and similarly challenging section. If you look at the QADI section, it has been overall on the easy side. Of course, it doesn't mean that it will be as easy as the questions you see in the SNAP or the NMAC. But overall, compared to the very difficult questions that you can get in the CAT, compared to that, it is overall fairly easy, fairly manageable. And if you look at the good attempts that were required to get the top calls, to get the XLRI poll, of course, you can see around 40 to 43 questions would be pretty good. So you can see the ranges are very similar. 45 plus attempts would be very good. And even 40 to 43 good attempts would help you get the point. Now let's come to each of the individual sections. We'll start off with VALR. So the first thing that we can notice, if we think about the distribution of the total 26 questions, the first thing we can see that half or slightly more than half of these questions come from reading comprehension. So similar to the CAT, RCs are the most important component of the verbal ability section. You can see last year there were 15 questions from 5 RCs. The previous year it was 13 questions, before that 12 questions, but it was around half of the total number of questions. So of course your RCs have to be very strong. And the best source to practice would be actual XAT questions. So you can try solving PYQs of the last 10 years. Last 6 years PYQs are there in your IMS portal in the test tab. Take them as mocks. Other previous years you can search online. You'll find them easily. Spend a lot of time solving these RCs, analyzing the options, thinking about how we could have eliminated the incorrect option. This is what will help you the most in this section. And then of course the IMS mocks are always there to take your preparation to the next level. Now, apart from reading comprehension, one interesting and unique thing that we see in the XAT is a poem-based passage. So basically there is a poem, and based on the poem you can have 2 questions. Now the poem could be an easy one, it could be a difficult one. Anything is possible, but at least to get used to it, maybe now is the time to start reading a few poems. At least go through the poems which are there in the PYQs, spend some time going through the solutions as well, and start becoming more comfortable with poems. Of course, that's not a priority since it's just 2 questions from there. The focus should still be on RCs, okay, but now is the time to at least start getting used to poems. Apart from that, we can see we have a good number of questions from critical reasoning. After that, the number of questions from the various topics are pretty low. You can see you might get 1 question from fill in the blanks, 1 question from para completion summary, and 2 questions from grammatically incorrect or correct sentences. Now, the total number of questions, as we saw, it has been 26. The good attempts out of these 26 questions would be around 14 questions. Now, this is for the average student. If your VLR section is on the stronger side, you might be able to attempt 17, 18 questions as well. Just make sure that you're not compromising on your accuracy. And the time allocation that we suggest is approximately 55 to 60 minutes in this section. The next section that we'll be looking at is the decision-making section. Now, if I talk a little bit about this section, this is the fairly challenging because it is the subjective section. Many people can have many different answers. They can have different logic, and you can debate about this endlessly. So the best way to prepare for this section would be to solve a lot of previous year questions. Definitely of the last 6 years in the form of mocks, and also another 4 years before that. And spend a lot of time analyzing each and every option, going through the solutions, and thinking about what is the logic behind the correct option. And based on what logic can we eliminate the incorrect options. Of course, you won't be able to get 100% accuracy here. That would be very, very rare. So you have to make sure that you are focusing on those questions that you are pretty confident about based on your experience with PYQs. So spend a lot of time with PYQs and also all the questions which are there in mocks. Spend a lot of time with the solutions. And the kind of questions you can get here can be a bit lengthy to read. The decision-making scenarios, the passages could be on the lengthy side. Every question might have some extra information, some situation which could be a bit lengthy. Like it could be 1 paragraph, but that could be a lengthy paragraph. So you have to be very comfortable with reading and you have to be fast with reading. So if you have lost your touch with reading after the CAT, now is the time to get back into it. Make sure that you're reading EON essays, you're reading all the DM questions in the PYQs, and you're generally reading something every day for a good bit of time. Like maybe 1 hour of reading every day, that would be required, because you can see that this section and also the VLR section, they are heavily based on reading. And in fact, when we talk about the quant section also, there can be questions which are pretty lengthy to read, even if they are not very difficult. So you have to be very comfortable and fast with reading. And therefore, you should get back into that habit through PYQs and also through EON essays. Now, if we come to the quant section, we can see that overall there has been a fairly good distribution among the different areas. We've had questions from each and every major area like arithmetic, algebra, geometry, numbers, modern maths. But one important change that we can observe is the increase in weightage to data interpretation questions. You can see in 2023, there were only 6 questions from DI. But recently, that has increased to around 12 to 13 questions. So DI has definitely become very important for the XAT. And out of 28 questions, if you're getting 12 questions from DI, which will be around 4 sets, that means you can't really ignore DI. So if DI is a weak area for you, should definitely be practicing more from the XAT PYQs, the mocks, and also from CAT material. The difficult DI sets which are there in the CAT as well, those will also be read. Then apart from DI, we can see that we've had a lot of questions from geometry in multiple years. You can see in 2023 and 2025, most number of questions were from geometry, if we remove DI. And apart from geometry, you can see overall other sections have been fairly well distributed. Like last year, 3 questions from modern maths, 3 from algebra, 3 from arithmetic, and 2 questions from numbers. So focus here should be more on data interpretation and on geometry, and then on the other sections equal. So you have to make sure that you're comfortable with each and every area, comfortable with each and every topic. Because of course, in the exam to do well, you have to make sure that you're picking out the easier questions and leaving the very difficult or the time-consuming questions. Now, if we come to the next part, which is the general knowledge section, we can see that there is a good distribution between current affairs and static GK questions. So normally we've always had more questions from current affairs compared to static GK. Earlier, the split used to be a bit more extreme. Like we would have 18 from current affairs and 7 from static GK. Next year, 16 and 9. But we can see that recently it has become a bit more balanced. Last year, it was 11 from current affairs and 9 from static GK. And this year, we expect there to be 12 from current affairs and 8 from static GK. Now, GK, of course, is very vast. So you can prepare for it endlessly. But of course, practically, that is not possible. So that is why in the IMS portal, we have a GK section which has that specific GK, where there will be a GK compendium from where you can prepare specifically for the XAT with the kind of questions, the kind of facts that will be most relevant for the XAT. Okay, so that is where you should prepare for. You can approximately give half an hour to GK every day. So from now till the XAT, you have a good bit of time. Even half an hour every day going through the XAT specific GK in the IMS portal should be more than. And of course, keep in touch with newspapers. Now, one thing you should know is that there is no negative marking for incorrect answers in this section. So, of course, you will be attempting everything. And the good genuine attempts here would be approximately 12 to 14 questions. The questions for which you actually know the answers and you're not guessing. Now, one thing you should know is that the scores from this section... Now, one thing you should know is that the score from this section will be exclusively used by XLRI. So only for XLRI and only for its final selection process. So the GK score or percentile will not be taken into account while shortlisting people for interviews. But once you are shortlisted and you appear for the interviews, then for the final selection, it will be taken into consideration. If I talk, since we've looked at each and every section, if I talk about the preparation, time distribution and the strategy. So if you have a good bit of time to prepare every day, you can give 2 hours to each section, 2 hours to VALR, 2 hours to QADI, 2 hours to decision making, and half an hour to G. So that will be approximately 6.5 hours every day. On alternate days, you can take mocks. Like if you take a mock today, tomorrow take a break in which you'll be practicing. Next day again, take another mock. And analyze every mock thoroughly. See which types of questions you're not able to solve, which topics they are from. And then make sure that you're getting more practice with those weaker areas through other PYQs and also through CAT material if required. And if I talk about the exam strategy, so we've discussed the time allocation to each of the sections. But one strategy that you could follow is that first you could spend 40 minutes in each of the 3 major sections. And in those 40 minutes, you can target the easier questions so that at least you'll be clearing the sectional cutoff of each section. And once you've achieved those easy marks, then you can target more questions from your stronger areas, from your stronger sections to maximize your overall score. So this kind of strategy you can follow in the mocks. Now, if we look at a sample XAT scorecard, so when we look at the 3 sections, QADI, VALR, and decision making, we can see that after that we have the total. And then GK is separate, which will not be a part of the total. So this is just a sample, just to give you an idea of what the final scorecard will look like. And more importantly, to show you that the total will not include GK. But now let's come to the important data of score versus percentile and the cutoff, the last thing that we'll be looking at. So if you look at this table, of course, the higher percentiles are there at the top. But first, let's talk about the cutoffs. So the overall cutoff for the DM program can be somewhere around 95, 96. For the HRM program can be around 93. So if we consider 95 percentile as a target, of course, the target should be slightly higher. So 95 percentile, we can see that overall we are expecting around 31.3, okay, somewhere around that. Now 98 percentile is 35.3. So if you get somewhere in between, let's say if you get around 33, 34, that should be a pretty safe score with which you can get a call from both BM and HRM programs. And if we talk about the sectional cutoffs, so the sectional cutoff varies from with respect to the programs. Different cutoffs for the BM program, different for the HRM one. And also it depends upon male candidates versus female candidates, engineers versus non-engineers. So if you want to explore it in a lot of detail, you can just go to Google. You can search for IMS XAT cutoff or IMS XLRI cutoff, and you'll be able to see all the data, the comprehensive data. But if we talk about it generally, In VALR and in decision making, the cutoff is on the lower side, it can be somewhere around 80, 82. And on the higher side, it can be somewhere around 85. So to be on the safe side, if you look at 85%, you can see that in VALR, it was 9.1 and in DM around 10. Okay, so those would be the scores to target to clear the sectional cut. And if we talk about quant, on the higher side, it can be somewhere around 88, 90 percentile. On the lower side, it can be 80 to 83 percentile. So if we talk about 85 and 90 percentile, 85 percentile would be 8.4 and 90 percentile would be 9.7. And of course, if you are targeting a higher percentile, which you should be in every section as well as overall, for example, a 99 percentile, because the higher the percentile, higher the chances of getting the call and also converting the call later. So overall for 99 percentile, the score required should be somewhere around 37.9, somewhere around 38 approximately. And each section you can see quant would be 15.6, VLR 15.2 and DM 40. So if you are very strong in all the sections or if you're very strong in any particular section, a good score will be around 15 in any section and overall somewhere around 30. So I hope this video was useful with respect to the data of the last 3 years, how to prepare, what kind of strategy to follow in the mocks. If you have any other question, feel free to post in the comments.